Mishmash!
Space Marines.
Heya, it's Mishmash again, and today we're painting up another Marine. Today's chapter is the Storm Lords. Storm Wardens. Storm Wardens. Not... what the hell is... Anyway. Wait, what? Are they silver or are they white? Pick a lane! Whatever, I'm painting them how I like. But before we get into it, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more videos like this. And remember, our next chapter is going to be the Raptors, so stay tuned for that. Anyway, let's get into it. So first and foremost, I spread this AK Interactive airbrush putty all over the guy. Point of this is to keep the white undercoat for the silver, well, white. It doesn't exactly matter too much, but I want the silver to be bright enough to kind of meet into a middle ground for all the different versions of the scheme. It seems like they couldn't quite figure out which one is actually canon. Once I'm happy with the placement of all the putty, I then airbrush over caledor sky all over the miniature. I think this color is kind of a good middle ground for all the blue as well. And keep in mind, you don't need an airbrush to do this. You could easily brush this on. I just like using the airbrush for time's sake. Once it's dry, I'll then slowly peel away all that putty. And man, that's satisfying. It's not even a particularly well done putty job. There's definitely some places that I missed, and we're gonna clean them up in just a minute. But I think it's really fun to do. Here I'm picking away at any blue places that I missed. It's not necessarily a huge spot that I missed, it's just little crevices, but just a nice go over with caledor sky will do. For the metallics, I'm now introducing Vallejo Silver Metallic. It's kind of my ghost gray of metallics at this point, but I think this color works really well for the silver that we want to do. We'll make sure to get this all over the legs and the hands, as well as the pauldrons and the aquila. I'm not too worried about spilling this color onto the blue. It's very easy to clean up, and after that I'm going to be introducing any sort of black that you wish. Personally, I like to use Vallejo model color black over Abaddon black, but both are equally good. I'll then be washing over with nuln oil, which I kind of should have waited for this, but I wanted to do it, and I got impatient. There is one glaring issue that you'll notice later on in this video that seems to keep popping up over and over again with this wash. I'll point it out here, actually. See, this little spot right here is when you move around the paint too much with your brush. This was initially a dry spot that I went over with my brush because I kept trying to move it around too much. And it's never a bad idea to move around the paint, it's just you can't keep going when it's already drying. And like I said previously, I should have waited to wash. There's some other colors that I needed to wash with nuln oil anyway, so doing it at this stage just wasn't exactly the smartest idea. I got a little overexcited, admittedly, and I'm sure you guys are screaming at your monitor right now thinking, Mishmash, why the hell do you say plan out your miniatures and then never do it? Well, I don't know any better and you can't get mad at me. Once the nuln oil had dried, I then clean up using the base colors, just going over the flat areas and leaving the recesses shaded. And then I'd begin highlighting with teclis blue over the caledor sky using my streaky highlighting method. I'd basically do the same thing with Vallejo metallic silver, kind of making these highlighted cleanups, while leaving the vast majority of the silver shaded. I tried doing the same thing over that bald spot that I left using the nuln oil, but as you can probably see, it's very obvious that it's still there. I'd gradually try to figure out new ways to cover this up as the video went on, but ultimately I settled on a decal. Because I use the M6 Corvus arms for this marine, I'm just painting these little wires using corn red. I'll then use Iron Warriors over the metallic coils between the joints on the Space Marine, as well as over the bolter and on some of the metallic areas on his helmet. I've also decided not to paint the bolter or the purity seal on camera, as I feel like I'll be doing this with every single Space Marine video if I end up doing that. So I'm just going to make a quick video on how to do that by themselves. That'll be out soon. I'm going to be doing that alongside the decal video. Since I've spilled just a little bit of metallic over the tabard, I'm going to be using some ghost gray to just kind of paint over that and clean it up, as well as add just some sketchy underlying highlights with it, just to make it look a little bit better when I use contrast paint over it. I'll then be taking one of my tester's dry brushes and using Vallejo Model Color Silver. This is the airbrush version, and I'm using this mostly just because it's really thin. And I would just want to make some scratchy, streaky highlights over the metallic. And if I get it on the blue, I don't really care, it looks natural. I'll then be taking more Teclis blue, and this is just me highlighting a little bit more in detail. I'm going over the pauldrons, anywhere over the marine itself, just going around and just adding these streaky little highlights. I think the helmet itself is a really good example of how I highlight marines. Doing these scratchy and sporadic motions really help out with really selling how these guys are in battle. I wouldn't say this method is exactly ideal for something clean like an Eldar miniature, but I don't think there's ever been a time that I painted a Space Marine that I didn't use this method. For all the skulls on the miniature, I'll be painting using a little bit of ghost gray. I ended up doing this over the helmet, greave, and the backpack. For the eyes, I'm then painting in just a little bit of Too Thin Coat's Dark Sun Yellow. I think using yellow over white is always a good idea if you're doing a warmer color for Space Marine eyes. That isn't to say that white isn't a good option, I just usually prefer that when I'm painting blue eyes. Here I'm just adding some nuln oil over the white, and again, why I should have just waited to use nuln oil over the entire miniature. For the cloak, I ended up making a really scuffed mixture. This is pallid bone mixed with holy white and a little bit of contrast medium. I'll put the ratio up on the top. You could easily substitute this with apothecary white or possibly any sort of skull contrast paint. I forgot what Citadel's name is. But honestly, I kept fussing with this as time went on because I wasn't exactly happy with it. I kind of experimented too much than I should have. That isn't to say I dislike how this looks by any means, I actually quite like it. I just think that I could have gone for a more simplistic method to get the same result. Some might say you can't argue with results, but anything that saves you time in the hobby, I would go for it, especially if you get the same result as this. You can also tell that I couldn't quite make it settle in a way that I liked. I ended up suspending the miniature using 2 paint pots for gravity to keep it in a way that I liked. But again, I feel like I spent way too much time on this, and there is probably so many more methods I could have used to save myself from doing that. Here I mixed Teclis Blue 50/50 with Fenrisian Gray for another highlight. I feel like I should have just used Fenrisian Gray overall, but I like to make these kind of mid-tone to bright highlights just to test the waters, especially for a color that I don't often paint. Which to me ultimately makes it look a little bit more realistic, but it's not exactly idealistic when painting. It takes a lot more time than it needs to be. So, in a lot of ways, you can skip these kinds of steps. Keep in mind, I typically never paint Space Marines for a tabletop standard. I like painting for myself. Except when it gets to a point that I just don't want to do it anymore. To paint the eyes, and then using just a little bit of Blood Angel's red. And with the yellow, I think it looks fantastic. Here I'm highlighting the helmet using Fenrisian Gray. I want to add kind of the sketchy method, but keep it mostly on the sharpest edges of the miniature. I'm not using the same sponging method for chipping as I did with Angel's Resplendent. I just want to keep this guy a little less scratched up, and I typically do this for Marines with multiple colors. You can see I'm kind of adding in little scratches with my brush. Not too jagged, but just enough to add some texture and some detail. So I'm sure you guys have noticed the weird disc where the Marine's head should be. That's a magnet. See, I wanted to do a tutorial on how to make magnetized heads for Marines, but I scuffed this to hell and back. I waited too long to put the magnet on the actual head, as I wanted to keep him on the stick for painting's sake. But what I really should have done is just added the magnet while the miniature wasn't painted yet. I didn't scratch any paint, but I ended up having to carve out basically the entire bottom of the head, just to make it look like, not this. But don't fret, I'm going to be going over this in my face painting tutorial, which will be coming out soon. I'll also be adding the secondary head for this miniature in that tutorial, so keep your eyes out for that. Here I'm just adding some Ghost Gray to clean up those skulls, and for the little bead decoration I'm just using Vallejo Burnt Red. To base coat whatever this thing is, I just used some Rhinox hide. And as time went on, I started adding just a little bit more of my mixture to the tabard. And I used a little bit of elfic flesh to highlight. You can see kind of these streaky lines that I made along the highlights. And once the Rhinox hide is dry, I'm using a little bit of Balthasar gold. Here I'm just adding the decal. I could have added a little bit of white to the pauldron for the lightning bolt, but ultimately I just decided to use the metallic silver underneath for the design itself. I'll go into more detail in the actual decal video, which should be up next week. I then decided to go over the brass case thing on the tabard using a mixture of Vallejo Model Color Silver and Hoard Bronze Speedpaint. Part of me kind of wishes this thing wasn't attached to the tabard, but it was my favorite option in the kit. Here I'm just adding some random scratches and highlights using Fenrisian Gray. I'm not going to go crazy like I did with the Angel's Resplendent as I said earlier, I'm just making some little streaks now and then. To fill in these streaks I'm just using a mixture of black and a little bit of dryad bark. To wash the entirety of our little case thing, I'm using some Vallejo sepia ink. We'll want to water this down just a little bit, as I don't want it to completely stain the color. You'll also probably notice that it kind of flicked around a little bit with how much I had watered it down. And I got it on the tabard itself, but I decided to keep it because it looked like a really good natural splatter effect of just some dirt and grime. I then decided to use dead white to highlight all the white parts of the miniature, and I added some little scratches using my brush over the decals, but I decided that the dry brush I had used earlier was a much better method of making those sporadic scratches. To finish off the little case thing on his tabard, I used a little bit of Vallejo model color silver. I then called the miniature done, as far as the armor goes anyway. To paint the bolt guns, purity seals, and leather, I'm going to be making a small video on the basics of painting Space Marines outside of their armor, so keep on the lookout for that. I decided to make his base a dank, slimy swamp, similar to their homeworld of Sacris. This took a long time and a lot of trial and error. I really don't believe that any footage that I caught of this would be very helpful, so I'll go over this in another tutorial later on. Possibly a short. Despite all the problems that came with painting this guy, I'm really happy with the result. Their color scheme isn't the flashiest, but man, it looks good. And their lore is just really interesting. If I find the time between any videos that I'm working on, I might make a little lore video. I know you guys have been asking for that. I hope this video was entertaining, and I really hope it was helpful for you. Considering how beloved this chapter is, I'm kinda surprised there aren't more painting tutorials on him, but hopefully that makes mine stick out just a little bit more. And if you liked what you saw, please remember to like, comment, and subscribe for more. And I don't mean to be annoying, but it seems like only 10% of the people that are watching my videos are subscribed. So if you could do that, I would greatly appreciate that. Plus, speaking of subscribers, we made it over 1,000, that's friggin' crazy! I never would have thought I'd get to this point, and I don't really know what to say. You guys mean the world to me, and I'll try to think of something cool for a 1,000 subscriber special. I'll try to utilize the community tab for any sort of ideas that I might have, see if you guys like it. I'd also like to say a special little thanks for everyone that voted for this video, as well as the other ones that I put on my community tab. Your votes and participation in the channel really make it easier for all the ideas kind of floating around in my head, and it's just cool to connect with you guys more. Some people have suggested making a Discord, but I don't really have to explain why I don't want to do that. But I think it might be kind of a cool idea for you guys to send in your miniatures based on the tutorials I put out. Send them in to mishmashpainting on Instagram or mishmashpainting@gmail.com. Anyway, I'm gonna close my beak now because I've been flapping it for far too long, and mishmash, kit bash, and paint some fantastic miniatures. And you're gonna, I promise. See ya! Sometimes this method doesn't work on other miniatures, especially if you're trying to do something clean like an Eldar minner. Minner? What?